All right, so we've talked about the signal molecules, water-soluble versus lipid-soluble. What I want to do is just have a look at some examples, have a look at our endocrine hormones. Remember, these are the ones that are secreted into the bloodstream. And again, you don't need to know this as memory information. I'm just going to enlarge this back up. I didn't realize I'd gone to a little screen. You don't need to know these. That's why it's got this little asterisk here. But it doesn't hurt to have an overview of some of our hormones, because these are often the ones that VCAR uses. And again, they're assuming that you don't actually have studied these, but I'm sure your teachers, when you're doing this sort of work in class, they will pinpoint some particular examples of hormones. So I think it's handy to just go through some. Now, our main endocrine glands, remember, an endocrine gland is a group of cells that secrete hormones into the bloodstream. And we have located around our body various clumps of these cells, and that's why it's called a gland, and they're secreting their own particular hormone. For example, the adrenal glands. You have two kidneys in your lower back either side, and on top of those, it's not the actual kidney, but on top of those, there are these groups of cells called the adrenal glands. And as the name suggests, they secrete adrenaline. They also secrete other ones like cortisol and things like that, and if you do psychology, you might know about those things. But adrenaline is probably the most common hormone that we associate with the adrenal glands. Now, adrenaline works, as it says, on heart muscle cells and liver cells. And the heart muscle cells, these therefore have the specific receptors that match the shape of adrenaline. These heart cells in particular are activated, and what's going to happen is adrenaline is going to increase heart rate. That's the organism response, because it increases contraction of these muscles cells. And by doing that, what we're going to have is increased blood flow, which is important for that flight and fight response, which is what it's actually designed for. And I know we get nervous and have adrenaline and you feel warm because of the increased blood flow, but it's to get the glucose and the oxygen to those cells so that you're actually going to be able to really get contraction happening as fast as possible so that you can run away from a predator or what it might be. So that's the adrenaline. Then we have, just at the base of the brain, not part of the brain tissue, there's this little group of cells about the size of a pea called the pituitary gland. Now, for its tiny size, it does a massive job. It's often called the master gland, because what it does is secrete a whole range of different hormones. And FSH, follicle stimulating hormone, is one that's released from just underneath the brain, and it works on the ovaries. Luteinizing hormone, again, works at the ovaries. So these are female hormones in particular that are moving down through there. One that is probably interesting to know is one called anti-diuretic hormone. And for those of you who did Unit 1, 2 and did kidneys, you might know that particular kidney cells, not all the kidney cells, but particularly ones of the collecting ducts, when water levels change in your blood plasma, it's the kidneys that do the water balance. The way they do the water balance is by ADH. If the water in the blood plasma drops, and so all the solutes are being concentrated and they're not as dilute as they need to be, ADH causes water reabsorption back into the blood. And if that happens, you have more concentrated urine. If you've got lots of water in the blood, then ADH is turned off, and so more water will come out in the urine. So it's all about water balance. That's the whole purpose of ADH. And water balance in the blood equals solute concentrations. So it's the water levels that's happening there. I'm just going to jump to this really important one, the pancreas. The pancreas is an extraordinary organ. The pancreas releases enzymes for digestion, for proteins, carbohydrates, and lipids. It also is an endocrine gland that has cells that produce hormone. So it's got this double function. It's quite amazing. There are two key hormones that are released by the pancreas. Insulin, which is the one you've probably heard about, and insulin works on nearly all your body cells. And what it does on your body cells, it increases glucose uptake. Glucose that's in the blood to be enter the cells by facilitated diffusion. But if it was just facilitated diffusion alone, that's not going to be happening fast enough. So insulin is there to make sure the cells are taking up glucose. And so that's the cell, and so the organism is going to have decreased blood glucose levels. So this is happening when you have an increase in blood glucose level. For example, after eating. So when you've had breakfast this morning or this afternoon or whenever you've eaten, then your blood glucose levels will go up. Insulin comes in to control that. But that you've got so much increase in blood glucose level, this isn't enough. So that your liver and muscle cells particularly, what they do is they also get the excess glucose that's in your blood and they convert it into glycogen, which is how you store your carbohydrates in your liver and muscle cells. And again, because glucose is coming out, the blood level of sugars will drop. And they'll drop down to hopefully optimum, which is quite a low level to be realistic. All right, so that's one of them. The other is another one called glucagon. Now this one only talks to your muscle and liver cells. It doesn't talk to all your body cells. So it's released by the pancreas. And its role is to increase blood glucose levels. So what it does, it makes these cells convert that stored glycogen back to glucose, which then leaves the cell and goes into the blood plasma. So glucagon is going to be released when your blood glucose levels drop. And this might be, for example, when you're asleep or just before meals where it's low. And the beauty of this is these two together work together to maintain optimum blood glucose levels in the blood plasma. And of course, we have the scenario if someone isn't producing insulin, which is diabetes, then this process isn't working. So they have to monitor very closely their blood glucose levels themselves, and they then have to inject insulin. If it's increasing, they'll inject insulin, or prior to eating, they'll inject insulin and then eat so that the insulin's there to do that sort of work. Now, they're really all three really fascinating glands of your body. The thing about these, all of these hormones are proteins. These are all water-soluble examples. All of these will have specific membrane receptors on the external surface of the membrane. They will all set off a secondary messenger system. They will all then set off their own unique series of enzymes in signal transduction, and then we will get the cell response from their target cells. Okay, moving down. Now we come down to another gland, the thyroid gland. And as you can see, the thyroid gland is this gland here. I'll just circle it in the neck. It's sort of wrapped around your trachea or windpipe, if you like. And this thyroid gland produces a hormone called thyroxine. Thyroxine is often referred to as the metabolic hormone. It works on most cells, but especially skeletal muscle. And what it does, it increases the metabolism. So most cells will have thyroxine receptors. And when it connects to its receptor, it will increase the metabolism. In the skeletal muscle, this is particularly going to be increasing contraction. And what that does is increase heat production. And this is what shivering is. So when the internal temperature is dropping and when the external temperature is cold, the concept of shivering is your muscles receiving thyroxine and making them do what muscles do, which is contract. And when muscles do metabolism, they produce heat. So this is our warming, if you like, hormone. All right, finally, we have, I'm running out of colours here. Finally, we have our ovaries as a gland. Now, the ovaries have so many functions. They're producing eggs, all these sorts of things, but they do produce key hormones. Estrogen is one that works, again, on the ovaries themselves. And estrogen working on the ovaries is responsible for ovulation, which is release of the egg from the ovary. There's another one, progesterone, and both of them work together on the uterus, and that's building up the uterus lining. Estrogen, again, is responsible for a lot of the sexual characteristics of the females, etc. And then we have testes, which produces testosterone. And again, testosterone is working on most cells and producing those secondary sexual characteristics. It's testosterone that builds up that masculine muscle development in a different way to females have. It's testosterone that works on the vocal cords. And vocal cords, if you know anything about music, when if you have a very tight string on an string instrument, it has a very high note. If that string is loosened, the note deepens or gets lower. And that's exactly what testosterone does. It actually works on the vocal cord membranes, which are across your windpipe, and it loosens them. So a male voice, when testosterone levels are build up enough, and that's at puberty, then that voice is lowered. And they think this is an evolutionary thing back in the day when we were roaming in the jungles with all the other animals, and the male tiger and lion have a deeper roar, and the male human has a deeper voice, and it penetrates forests and all that. And it's still obviously happening, not the roaming in the jungles, but the deepness of the voice, because if it's not a disadvantage, well, then it will stay in evolution. But also, testosterone works on the testes cells for sperm production. And it's all to do with different levels, how these are operating different levels. And just as a gland, the ovary and testes are often referred to as the gonads of the of the animal. All right, so just some more interesting ones. But for us, the real interest lies here. These are lipid-soluble hormones. So these ones are working in that way where they will cross the membrane and they will then move to an internal receptor specific to whichever one it is, and that will then set off a cell response as such. So just a nice little overview, hopefully, of some of our key hormones and where they fit into this water-soluble, lipid-soluble story.